absolutely. So my name's Ashley, and I've worked for OCD UK for 20 years now. We're a national charity that helps support people affected by obsessive compulsive disorder, which is an anxiety disorder and can affect people quite seriously. And I'm actually my official title is Chief Executive of the charity.
So can you give a description of what OCD looks like and how many people are living with OCD in the UK, if you have any
Yeah, of course.
statistics?
Yeah, it's a good question because OCD can look different for each individual. So there's how it affects person A will be different to how it affects person B. So sometimes I like to think of OCD as a process because even though people will have different manifestations, the process that's going on is exactly the same for each person. So it's an anxiety related condition where a person experiences regular, frequent, but unwanted intrusive thoughts. And those intrusive thoughts can be the form of thoughts, images, feelings, and that generates anxiety, which leads to repetitive behaviours, which we call compulsions, which can be impulses or urges that a person feels they must complete to prevent the intrusive thought from becoming a reality. Um, and it's worth noting that a disproportionately high number of people affected by OCD, so well over 50%, will be what we consider severe to the point that they need significant ongoing treatment. Yeah, so how it looks to different people depends on the nature of their intrusive thoughts. So often it will depend on what's important in a person's life in that moment. So my manifestation has always taken the form of contamination around germs, a fear of germs. So my compulsions will look like stereotypical consideration of OCD, if you like. It will look like washing of the hands, showering for hours at a time. Um, but it's important to note that the behaviours are only one part of OCD, that they don't happen without the obsessions, the preceding obsessions, the unwanted fear and worries that drive those behaviours. And we don't know for certain, but we think approximately 1.2% of the UK population will be affected by OCD, which is around 750,000 people. But often loved ones get involved in the compulsions. So in some respects, you can actually say that the amount of people affected by OCD is actually much higher than that.
How does OCD affect a person's cognitive functionality?
Yeah, so again, it's a good question. What we know is that OCD impacts on people's both, they can find it both physically and mentally draining. What we think from research is that OCD doesn't impact a person's memory, or it's not because of memory defects. We think what happens with OCD is that it's a person's lack of confidence in their own memory, which is what leads to some of the doubts and uncertainties that play a part in OCD. Um, and we've done research into that, and what we see is that the more you ask somebody to check, for example, the less certain they become about their memory if they checked it right in the first place. And that's what goes on with OCD, that the more a person checks, the less certain they become. And the less certain they become, the more they need to check as part of their need for certainty.
Do you think if someone had strongly OCD, putting things in the right place, washing the hands, or having it cleaned, or like in perfect positions, do you think that's to do with OCD as well, or is that just the way the memory is? They think that it's to be in the right position because I like to have things put back in the right position, blinds closed in the right way, lights on at the right time. So do you think is that just because of muscle memory, or is that to do with OCD as well?
It depends on the reasons. It's a good question again. So, where it's OCD this often gets forgotten because OCD gets trivialized a lot, but the D in OCD means disorder. So, if a person, so if putting things back a certain way and is because somebody wants to do it, that's fine. That's probably not OCD. But if it leads to significant anxiety, show-stopping anxiety, where a person can't function and can't continue with their day unless things are arranged a certain way, then that's more likely to be OCD. So OCD is diagnosed, but partly based on the impact on the functionality on a person's quality of life. And it's one of the reasons the World Health Organization many years ago listed OCD in the top 10 most disabling illnesses based on um, loss of income and quality of life.
What are the psychological repercussions on psychological health, and how does it impact everyday behavior, OCD?
Yeah, so what we know is that left untreated, OCD can have the ability to impact on every aspect of a person's life, and it will vary from person to person. But we know for it can stop young people, your children going to school because they just that their anxiety is so strong it just stops them leaving the house. For others, they might be able to do that, but then you have to go through a number of rituals, behaviours when they get home, which means they don't have a quality of life. So that, of course, impacts on relationships. And for those with OCD that are adults, it sometimes can prevent them working or makes working much harder, makes them late for work, and sometimes it sadly can have very tragic circumstances, consequences. But the good news is we do know how to treat OCD. That with the right support and right treatment, people can and do get better.
Is it an
Okay.
advantage for people with OCD to have homeschooling then, or
It can happen,
they
yeah.
learn
So
better?
yeah, for some people, again, it depends on the nature of the OCD, but for some children, they find that they can't go out, that they're afraid of germs, or that whatever their fear is means that find it really difficult being around other children, other young people. And sometimes intrusive thoughts could be not about, they might not be about cleanliness or contamination. They might be about thoughts that they're going to hurt a loved one, or they're going to hurt a school friend. And we know with OCD that the thoughts do not mean risk. It's just the nature of the thoughts that can bombard somebody. And so it's natural with adults as well that sometimes you avoid the things that are going to trigger your OCD, that are going to lead to hours and hours of unwanted thoughts and behaviors. So you might avoid what's going to trigger that, such as going out or being around children, or going to school. So on one hand, it's helpful, it relieves anxiety, but on the other hand, it perpetuates this ever-going cycle of OCD.
Well, next question is there a genetic link with OCD, and um, is each case different?
We actually don't know what causes OCD. There's lots of theories out there, and some of those have been debunked over the years. And it is possible that there may be a genetic link, but then so we do see OCD runs in families sometimes, but then in other cases, there's no family correlation. We've seen identical twins. One will have OCD, one will not have OCD. So the honest answer is that we actually don't know what causes OCD yet. Hopefully, we will at some point. Um, my sort of thought process is that it probably needs to be a number of factors that come together, maybe at the wrong time in a person's life, which will include genetics, but maybe other factors need to combine for the OCD to sort of brain lock, if you like, to become stuck, and for a person to then to go on to develop more and more OCD problems.
How does OCD typically become progressive and persistent, more intense than the first perception of OCD?
Yeah,
If
so there's a great saying that one of the professors that we work with, Professor Paul Tchaikovsky, based at the University of Oxford, he's got this saying that solution becomes the problem. And it's a great saying that that basically answers your question. So what happens is when a person does a compulsion, It's to relieve the thoughts, the anxiety, but the more you do it, the more you feel you have to do it next time. So the more you're doing this solution, the bigger the problem you're creating, and just becomes a vicious cycle. So every time you're triggered by an intrusive thought, the anxiety is generated, and it makes you feel you must do this behaviour to alleviate that anxiety, and it gives temporary relief. But it's reinforcing the false meaning interpretation of the intrusive thought, which then leads to need to do more behaviours next time you do a compulsion. And the more and more you do the compulsions, the bigger the problem you're creating. So at some point we have to break that cycle, and that's where the treatment, the psychological treatment, works to help a person change their thought process, and then eventually change and challenge their behaviours.
How does someone identify their symptoms of OCD and that they've got OCD?
Yeah, so again, it's interesting because sometimes loved ones around the person might spot symptoms before the person with OCD. And sometimes it'll be the intrusive thoughts that are what you experience first, whether that be about germs, whether it be about being violent, whether it be being about a sexual predator, whatever the nature of intrusive thoughts that a person experiences. Um, and often people won't realize that they're linked to OCD. And the common thing is that you'll have intrusive thought, which leads to anxiety, which leads to behavior. So if you're seeing though that sort of cycle, then there's a good chance it could well be OCD. And that's where a trip to your GP is really important to talk it through and either be referred for a diagnosis or referred for treatment.
How does someone differentiate OCD from other disorders and how can they control the symptoms?
Yeah, so OCD can look quite similar to other problems. For example, general anxiety disorder. With OCD, it's often very specific. So the person will have the intrusive thought, which generates the fears and worries. Um, and it's specific on a subject. Often, as I say, it's about what might be important to a person at that time. Maybe it's focused around a loved one, something bad happened to a loved one. Maybe it's about a pet. And often the person with OCD will recognize that their thoughts don't quite make sense, but they don't feel they can't pay attention to them. They feel compelled to actually carry out those behaviors and rituals. Um, so that's one of the ways that OC differs is that the person will often be very much aware that what they're doing doesn't make sense, but they don't feel able to not do that, if that makes sense.
Okay, so
So
I'm gonna ask you a question. So, let's say I don't have OCD. What's the process of knowing if someone's got OCD? Because if they're washing their hands all the time, they want to have something clean, they don't want anything dirty. What's the process if they do or if they don't have OCD?
So one of the differences is that a person without OCD will wash their hands because they see the dirty, and that's it. Quick and wash of the hands, see the soap on the hands, and they get on with the day. A person with OCD, it's more about a feeling. It's not that they see their hands dirty, but it's that they feel unclean. So actually, sometimes it's referred to as contamination OCD, but I don't think it is that. I think it's more about decontaminating because we feel unclean, so we wash our hands. But you still don't feel clean, so we keep washing. And the more we try and feel that cleansiness, that the fact that our hands are clean, the less certain we become. And that 10-second hand wash can become a 10-minute hand wash. So that's one of the differences between someone without OCD and somebody with OCD. That often it's about feeling and um, one of the reasons our logo is in grey, or part of our logo is in grey, is that with OCD, sometimes people struggle with any sense of uncertainty. They need black or white answers. They need that certainty that something has been done or hasn't been done. And so they struggle to live with the uncertainty. And that's why we put our logo in grey to show that actually it is achievable. You can live with uncertainty. It doesn't mean you have to do your behaviour. You just need part of the treatment is becoming comfortable being uncomfortable.
So that means if you're washing your hands so many times, it's not OCD, it's just that the person that is, they just want to be clean and putting things in the right positions. It's just that the way the person is.
It depends on the reason. So if they're washing their hands 50 times because they like to do that, it's probably not OCD. But if they're washing their hands because they feel something bad will happen if they don't, then that's more likely to be OCD at that point.
What are the common symptoms of obsessions in OCD, which person will commonly experience?
Um, that's a good exercise for understanding the difference. So the washing the hands and organisation, they're not obsessions. They would be what we call compulsions because they're the behaviours. The obsessions is the underlying fear, worry that's driving those behaviours. So maybe I might wash my hands, or in my case, I couldn't even use the toilet without spending 2 hours showering, which meant I didn't use a public toilet for the best part of a decade because I couldn't use a shower afterwards. Um, but the fear that was driving that, the obsession, was that I'm going to become contaminated and I'm going to be uncomfortable. And if I'm contaminated, I'm going to mean people around me are going to become contaminated and they might become unwell. So that's an example of the obsession there. Another example of an obsession is somebody that fears that they've caused an accident while driving. So that they worry that they're a bad person because they've been careless and not paid attention when driving. The compulsion, the behaviour, will be that a person will check that there's not been an accident when they get home. They will look on the local newspapers. They will even go back and drive, even if it means a 50-mile journey, to check there's not been any accident. And of course, if you drive 50 miles, you're going to see accidents. It just happens. If you're driving a long distance, you occasionally see the odd um, accident along the side of the road. So yeah, obsessions can be a number of things. It could be about any subject. It could be about a person feeling that that they're going to stab a loved one with a knife. It could be an ordinary kitchen knife. They've got absolutely no intent of doing this. They don't want to do this, but they love their partner. And their OCD makes them, for whatever reason, thinks that they're going to stab them with a kitchen knife. So the compulsion for that will be to avoid using the kitchen knives. Get the partner to lock the kitchen knives away, so the person with OCD can't even access them. Um, and we're short of time, so I could go on, but there's lots and lots of different obsessions and compulsions, and some of those you can find on our website at ocduk.org.
So, are there any medications that control OCD?
Yeah, so there are medications that are prescribed in the treatment of OCD. So in England, we've got something called the NICE guidelines, which are a set of guidelines that NHS services should be following, and that does list some medications. Now, they are commonly what we call SSRIs, which are a form of antidepressant. And it was discovered back in the 70s, early 80s, that these can make people with OCD feel a little bit better. They weren't specifically designed for OCD. So we are very much a belief that the medication is one treatment, but the other treatment is the psychological therapy, something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's really important if somebody's suffering from OCD that they speak to the GP about getting access to CBT on the NHS.
Okay. And how can family and friends help and support a person who has OCD?
Yeah, so again, it's another great question, and it's actually a complex question. So I probably haven't got a lot of time to explain that, but I'll try and do my best. So forgive me. So first thing I would say is education. If you've got a loved one with OCD and you're a family member that's listening to this, that really important you try and learn about OCD, not just your partner, your loved one's OCD, your partners or your son or daughters, but OCD in general, because OCD does change over time. So a person might have a problem with something one day, but then a month down the line, it might be another aspect of OCD. So it's important you become educated about OCD. Knowledge is power. Understanding the OCD cycle that I've described today, the process will really help you. Secondly, to that, try and understand your loved one's OCD. They may not know themselves, they may not fully understand it, they may not fully be able to verbalize it, but just try, if you can, try and talk to them on a calm day when they're not feeling overly anxious about how they feel when they're doing their behaviors and what's driving their behaviors. Um, Third thing is um, be careful of giving reassurance and avoidance. So it's natural when you've got OCD to seek out for reassurance from a loved one. Have I hurt you? Is this clean? Can you please take the bin out for me? Can you please put the knife away? It's natural that we want to relieve our loved one's anxiety. But the problem is the more that we do it now, the bigger the rod for our back we're making further down the line. Because at some point we'd have to stop doing those. So it's important to be aware of when you're giving reassurance for OCD and aware of when you're helping a person with the what we call an avoidance. And I'm not saying you stop doing those because without any treatment, those may be needed in the short term. But be aware, make notes of it, so when your loved one does start therapy, you can discuss that with your therapist about alternative things you could do when your loved one with OCD comes to you for reassurance. What can you do instead? Maybe you give them a hug. That's emotional reassurance, and that's fine. Um, so yeah, it is complex, and there's lots of resources on our website to help family members. But yeah, they're probably the two most important things are educate yourselves, be aware of reassurance, etc. And if your loved one maybe needs a little bit of support to reach out for treatment, really important that you do that. Help them go to the GP if they need that help. And it's important that as the person with OCD wants treatment, because it's important that we don't force treatment on them. It's got to come from the person with OCD, but you can be there to support them in that journey.
If you're a parent concerned about your child with OCD, how does anyone, um, how does anyone access professional advice and support from a medical professional?
Yeah, so if it's a parent of a young child, so under 18, what the parent would need to do is go to the GP and ask the GP make a referral to the local CAMS, which is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Um, Unfortunately, we do know there are long waits. So that's the first step. In the meantime, while the child is on the wait to be seen by CAMS, our charity provides one-day educational workshops on OCD, which are completely free of charge. So a parent can register for them. And of course, there's lots of books on OCD that a parent can be reading in the meantime. Um, if you're a parent of an adult with OCD, it's a little bit more complicated because you can't make the referral for your loved one. But you can again use the resources on various charity websites, not just ours, and try and get a better understanding of OCD.
What piece of best advice would you give to anyone that does have OCD and how can they limit it?
Yeah, so best piece of advice is don't give up hope. You might not see it right now, but recovery is possible. People can and do get better from OCD. I'm still working on my recovery, but I'm certainly a best part of 80% better than where I was 10 years ago. And I've seen people recover to the point where OCD really impacts on their life now. So don't give up hope. Keep working at recovery. Believe in recovery because it is hard. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, it's challenging. But having that belief that one day you will get better does make the world of difference.
So, like you said, that you've still recovering from your OCD. So, could you give any stories or any experience from your time of OCD?
Yeah, so again, it's important I mentioned that my story is a little bit stereotypical, but people will be affected by OCD in many different ways. So forgive me if my story is along those stereotypical lines, but mine was around a fear of using toilets and germs. And one of my exercises that some people might gasp at, but over the best part of 20 years since I was a teenager, I'd become afraid of toilets. I couldn't even touch a toilet lid. It would have meant a 2 hour shower ritual. So part of my CBT, which is something I worked up to, wasn't done straight away. It took me many months of CBT to do this. Was that I was gonna not only touch a toilet but put my hand in the toilet water without then washing my hands. And it was an exercise I did alongside a therapist. So I wasn't just told to go and do it. I did it with a therapist, and the therapist empowered me. Even though I was incredibly anxious, it was something that then meant I was able to actually then go on and use a public toilet without needing to spend 2 hours showering and washing. So that's one example of where CBT helped me. But it's important to recognise there's two parts of the behavior, the cognitive behavioural therapy. That the C part is the cognitive therapy that looks at how we think, and the B part is behaviour therapy, which looks at how this affects what we do. So in treatment, we consider other ways of thinking and the meanings that we're attaching to the thoughts and how that affects the way we behave. So the CBT, again, it's complex, but a good therapist can help a person with OCD to make sense of their problems and to find different ways to deal with the intrusive thoughts. Through our website, which is ocduk.org, and through email, they can email support@ocduk.org, where we'll try and get back to people within 24 hours. Sometimes it's within an hour, but obviously depends on the time of the day that person emails.